want to thank all of you for being here today and for all of the work that you are doing and putting in to elect me as your next governor, to make sure that we bring back majorities to the House, to the Senate, to the Executive Council. That we send Chris and Maggie to Congress. And of course, that we put Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the White House. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nick Sperduto, and I'm an organizer with the New Hampshire Democratic Coordinated Campaign. I'm a proud Granite Stater. I grew up in Canterbury, 10 minutes from here, and it is such an honor to host President Biden today. Thank you for coming to New Hampshire. And to Joyce Craig, Maggie Goodlander, and our congressional delegation, Senator Shaheen, Senator Hassan, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all the work that you do for New Hampshire. There are 2 weeks until Election Day. 2 weeks to make sure Granite Staters know that the stakes of this election could not be higher. And as we know, this election is a very stark contrast between 2 different visions for the future. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz and New Hampshire Democrats are fighting for all of us. Reproductive freedom, strengthening our democracy, and lowering costs for all. And then we have Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and New Hampshire Republicans, and they want to enact his extreme Project 2025 agenda, which would look like rolling back freedoms, hurting the middle class, and threatening our democracy. So we are very lucky to have champions like Joyce Craig and Maggie Goodlander on the ballot this year, and we need to do everything we can to elect them in the next 14 days. And the choice is very clear. We need all of your help. We need you knocking doors. We need you making phone calls. We need you to have these conversations with your friends and family. It's going to be the difference. GOTV, my favorite acronym, GOTV has begun. So that means we are working every single day to get out the vote, mobilize Granite Staters, and ensure that everyone has a plan to vote in this election. This is critically important work, and we can't do it without all of you. So together, we're going to choose a new way forward and elect Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, Joyce Craig, Maggie Goodlander, and New Hampshire Democrats up and down the ballot. And now it is my distinct honor to introduce a man who has always put this country first, a champion for our rights, our freedoms, and our democracy. We are so grateful to have him in New Hampshire today. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
This work? Does this one work? This handheld mic? Can we make that? It works. It works. Can you hear me? All right. Well, first of all, 14 days. You know, folks, I know I don't look like I'm only 40, but I've been doing this a long time. It's not exaggeration to say this is the most important election any one of you have ever voted in, no matter if it's your first election or you've been doing it for as long as I have. I really mean it. You know, I got elected to the Senate when I was 29 years old. I come from a very modest family. Had the dubious distinction of being listed as the poorest man in Congress for 36 years. But I never thought that because I got a good salary as a senator. My generic point is this. I got there when I was a kid at 29 and because of basically civil rights issues in my state. My state was a slave state early on with 3 other states that fought on the side of the North. And my state was divided. Downstate, the southern part of the state, talk at you like this, like in Eastern Shore, Maryland. Upstate is more like, suburban Philadelphia areas. And when I got engaged, we had real differences. We had a lot of segregationists still left in the Senate. We had a lot of really conservative people in the Democratic Party. But even that wasn't, like I said, I've got deeply involved in the civil rights issues. But even that didn't separate us in a way that we're separated today. We were separated very badly, but after we would argue like hell, we'd sit down and go to lunch together in the Senate dining room. And in the process, people changed their minds. Before he died, Strom Thurmond had the largest black staff in America in the United States Senate, voted for the Civil Rights Act. Things change. We're dealing with a totally different breed of cat now. The civil rights era is terrible. But we got a group now that is just, is literally, and I'm not one that is prone to hyperbole, but we have a group running, the MAGA Republicans, who have an anti-democratic attitude toward the way the Constitution functions. They have virtually no regard for the Constitution. First speech I made, no reason why I'd remember it, but when I got elected, when I got the nomination, I spoke at Independence Hall and I said, our very democracy is at stake. It's not hyperbole. Our democracy is at stake. Think about it. Think about what happens if Donald Trump were to win this election. Think about what it means. He's made it clear what he wants to do. He's not joking about it. He's deadly earnest. He wants to change the way in which the so-called safeguards of the Constitution are honored. He wants to disregard them. You saw what happened when those folks broke through the Capitol, killed police officers, unless he calls them heroes. He wants to release them from prison terms that they've all gotten. He won't even commit that if he loses this election, he'll go peacefully. He will not make that commitment. He talks about there being a bloodbath if he loses. These are words no president has ever used. No president ever used. And by the way, if you don't believe it now, you're going to learn if he wins. It's a serious, serious problem. So, folks, the first point I want to make to you is we must win. We must win not only for ourselves, but for our children, and the children aren't even born yet. It makes a significant difference. The only value of being around a long time, I have more experience than any president in the history of the United States of America. I've gotten to know literally, not figuratively, not make me good or bad, and I've gotten to know every major world leader personally over those years because of my involvement in American foreign policy. The rest of the world is scared to death of what's going to happen if he gets elected. Not a joke. Not a joke. Every one of these international meetings I attend, I get pulled aside as I walk out and say, you got to win. You got to win. My democracy is at stake, meaning their democracy. You hear what he talks about in terms of what happens in Europe. I spent 4 years putting NATO back together with Kamala and I. He wants to get out of NATO. He's talking about how he's good friends with Putin and how we can just talk to him. When we were in the middle of the crisis, when we needed all those masks and all those tests for COVID, he was giving those in short supply to Putin. No president ever been like this guy. I'm afraid I'll get going, and I'll really tell you what I think in a minute. But I'm serious. He is a genuine threat to our democracy. And that's not hyperbole. That is God's truth. And folks, it's not just him. It's the people who are around him. These MAGA Republicans mean what they say. They genuinely mean what they say. For example, Barack and I work like hell, and Barack deserves all the credit for the Affordable Care Act, making sure people who didn't have coverage got coverage. More people have health care today than any time in American history. He wants to. But it has to be reauthorized. Must be. He wants to end it. Wants to take it away. 100 million people with pre-existing conditions would lose health insurance. 100 million. One of the things they told me we could never get done, I was able to deal with the Affordable Care Act. But not just that. Look what we did with the drug companies. These guys are ripping. I can put you in Air Force One and take you with me now. If you have a prescription to fill, I can take you to London. I can take you to Berlin. I can take you to any major city in the world. And I can get you that same prescription filled by the same company for anywhere between 40 and 80% less than it costs here. He wants to do away with the Affordable Care Act. With the whole legislation allowing that to happen. Not one single Republican voted for it. Not one single Republican. I'm not going to go on because I could, but the point is, this guy wants to change it all. He wants to rip it apart. All these press people know the hell what they're talking about, and they do. I really mean it. He believes in a free press like I believe in whether I can climb Mount Everest. But I'm serious. They're going to be straight with you and tell you what they think. They don't agree with me. They're not all for me by any stretch of the imagination. But this guy means what he says. And I think every one of them know in their heart that this will not be our democracy. Look, I'll conclude this. We're in a situation where every 5 or 6 generations, we reach an inflection point in American history where the decisions we make in a very short span of time are going to determine what the rest of the next 5, 6, 7 decades are going to look like. Not a joke. The decisions we make this election and the last election is going to determine what this country looks like for the next 5 or 6 decades. That is not a joke. That's a straight fact. There's not a single thing we've done. And we've passed, they told us we couldn't get anything passed. Well, Kamala, I got a hell of a lot passed. I got more passed than any president has in 4 years. But all of it's on a knife's edge. It's on a knife's edge right now. And so this is really, 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 really an important election. And folks, look, think about it. He is talking about doing away with the entire Department of Education. He means it. This is not a joke. This is a guy who also wants to replace every civil servant, every single one. Thinks he has a right under the Supreme Court ruling on immunity to be able, if need be, if it was the case, to actually physically eliminate, shoot, kill someone who he believes to be the threat to him. So I know this sounds bizarre. It sounds like if I said this 5 years ago, you'd lock me up. We got to lock him up. Politically lock him up. Lock him out. That's what we have to do. And so look, you all know how this works. Every single vote counts. And that's, again, not hyperbole. Think how close these elections can be. And you've got one of the best delegations in the United States Senate. I'm not joking. No. That's not a joke. That's not a joke. They got more courage than the 10 best guys I know. No, I'm serious. Think of the courage of the votes they've taken. And you've changed New Hampshire. You've changed New Hampshire. I've been coming up to New Hampshire since 1974. as a 31-year-old, 32-year-old senator. You've changed it. It's gotten stronger because what you're dealing with here is you're not dealing with all the actually mindless Republicans. No, I'm serious. Think about what these guys are saying. Listen to what they say. They mean it. They mean it. And so, thank God you've got really quality candidates. We were riding up, the governor's an old friend. No, he really is an old friend. He and the doc are close friends for a long, long time. So they rode up with me in Air Force One. We talked about how much things have changed for the better here, and how many quality candidates you have. You've never had a group of more qualified candidates running, up and down the ticket. And so, look, there's a poem written by, I'm always quoting Irish poets. I think I do it because I'm Irish. I don't quote it. I don't do it because they're the best poets in the world. And there's a poet, his wife I got to know, and I've got some of his material. It says he wrote a poem called The Cure at Troy. He says, history teaches us not to hope on this side of the grave, but then, once in a lifetime, that longed-for tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rhyme. We have a chance. We have a chance to begin to make hope and history rhyme. The changes you've made, the changes we've made, have you ever seen a time, even if you're as old as I am, have you ever seen any time when as many major Republicans have endorsed a Democratic candidate for president? No, I'm serious. I'm serious. And you ask them why. They don't agree with us on the specific issues. But what they do understand is this guy is a danger to the Republic. And so look, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but you see this woman here? She worked for me. She worked for me for a while. She worked also in the state. This woman here has more courage in her political, no, I'm not joking. It's not a joke. And her little finger that most people have in their whole body, political courage. I'm serious. I'm deadly earnest, and she's smart as hell. She's going to make a difference for you all. She's replacing a really fine congresswoman, but it's going to make a difference. And look, these two women here, I'm not joking, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are. Think of all the things that would not have passed when you're not in the Senate, both of you. The consequential things. Make a difference to people's lives. And folks, I wasn't supposed to take this long, and I apologize. But let me say one closing concept. The biggest mistake the Democratic Party has made, and I'm part of it, is that we spent all our time on the Senate, the House, the presidency. We didn't do what the Republicans did. We didn't spend our time electing state reps. No, I'm not kidding. State reps, state senators, and governors. They did. You got one right here in a governor. I'm serious. Think about what we can do. Look, this woman not only worked for me, she also worked for one of the guys that came to work for me. He's one of my best friends, John McCain, a Republican, because he was honorable. We disagreed like we'd fight like hell. When he got out of prison camp for a long time, he came to work with me when he was freed. He worked in the Senate, and we traveled over 1,200,000 miles together, going around the country. Matter of fact, when we were flying off to, I think we were heading to Japan, we stopped in Hawaii, and John was with me. And John looked at, he was then separated, divorced from his wife, and he looked at me and he said, "You see that Admiral's daughter? She's beautiful." I said, "Why don't you say hi to her?" He said, No. So I went up and I said, "My name's Joe Biden." I got someone, I did. So I want someone to meet. And I took her hand, I walked her over, I said, "Why don't you meet my buddy John McCain?" He married her. But John and I would, like brothers, we'd argue like hell. I mean, shout at each other. Then we'd sit down and have dinner together. We disagreed. But John was a patriot. There's a lot of good Republicans out there. But these guys are not that breed of cat. They're a different group. So you got it. I wasn't going to run, as I said, after this for president again. And I mean that sincerely. And my son, Bo, who was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, and one day I came home, I used to commute home because I couldn't afford daycare, I couldn't afford house care. But my mom and the whole family's helping take care of my kids after my wife and daughter were killed. And so I commuted for 36 years on the train. And as I got off the train, and I said, my son Bo said to me, Dad, what are you doing on Friday? This was on the previous Sunday. And I said, what do you mean? I'd like you to pin my bars on. I said, pin your bars on? Yeah, Dad. He said, I joined the National Guard. I said, you're married. You got 2 kids. And he said, Dad, but we have to, somebody's got to do this. So he got sent to Iraq for a year. And you're either state property or you're federal property. So you either work for the president or you work for the governor. So he gave up his attorney general's job temporarily when he got deployed to Iraq for a year. The problem was he was only about 300 yards from a burn pit, just like those guys who went on 9/11 into those firefighters. And he came home with stage 4 glioblastoma, and no one makes it. And he died. But before he died, and this relates to how strongly I feel about this, before he died, he said, Dad, you got to make me, we were going home because my father had died, my mom had moved in with us. And my wife and I were coming home from Washington on a Friday. And so we lived as the crow flies, just a mile from where son Bo was, but really 2 miles in terms of getting there. So we went over his house for dinner. After dinner, my wife said, I'm going home and change. It was a Friday afternoon. It was in, I guess, probably, anyway. And Bo turned to his wife and said, would you take the kids? I want to talk to Dad. And he said, Dad, give him my word. He said, Dad, look at me. We have this thing about Biden. Look at me. I'm really serious. And he said, Dad, I know when I die, we know, I said, we both know I'm going to die, Dad. I'm going to be okay, though. I'm okay with it, Dad. He said, you got to make me a promise. You got to make me a promise. I said, what's the promise, honey? He said, promise me you won't quit. You'll want to quit. You'll want to get out of politics. I said, Bo, he said, Dad, promise me. Give me your word as a Biden dad. Look at me, Dad. Look at me. And I gave my word. I had no intention of running again until then. But even then, I didn't think I'd ever run again. I'd stay engaged, but I'd run this after being vice president. And then I saw those folks coming out of the fields in Charlottesville, carrying Nazi swastikas and torches, accompanied by the Ku Klux Klan. And Bo had died, and I looked at it, and I knew I had to keep my promise. So that's the only reason I ran again. And I ran because Bo knows, and you know in your heart, every one of you, I've asked you, if Trump wins, this nation changes. There's only 2 things we can do. Guarantee that he doesn't, or if he does, make sure we have the strongest Democratic majority we can get to make sure he does. And the thing I can say, and I've told this both to both your senators, and I told your former governor, my buddy, if there's one word to describe you all, you have enormous integrity. No, you have enormous integrity. It's the highest compliment in my family you can give anyone, integrity. So folks, let's be the party we say we are. Last comment I'll make. When I was vice president, I had gotten, I think both my colleagues would say, when I left the Senate, I was thought to be someone who get a lot done in the Senate. I was able to cross the aisle pretty well. And after being vice president for 6 years, 7 years, and as Barack would tell you, I was the only guy that went up to the Senate and the House to deal with the Congress because of my experience. And I was asked, so I decided things were getting really kind of rough because we were starting to get this division was getting personal that was existing in politics. So I decided to go up to since I was president of the Senate as the vice president, I went up to the Senate dining room. Used to be a dining room. There was a dining room in the Senate. There were two of them. If you go down and the senators, we're going to take you to lunch. They'll take you to the Senate dining room. They can take you in to a dining room where they can sit with you and you can have lunch. There's a waiting room there. But right across from it, there's another dining room. It's private. It's a room about the size of this one with an archway that is about where you guys are. There's a great big table that seats, 10, 12, 14 people. And there is a buffet along the left side. And then you go through that archway, and there's another table facing the other perpendicular. And the Democrats sit in one table and the Republicans in another. When there are not that many people there, you sit together. And you get to know somebody. You get to know them so you don't hate them and you find out that their wife has breast cancer, or they have a son who's in trouble, or they have a daughter that's hooked on drugs, or they have some serious problem. Even if you totally disagree with them, it's hard to dislike them. And then we used to have lunch all together all the time, even after bitter arguments on the floor. And we got to know one another. It was hard to hate the people you knew, and you knew the personal side of them. So I decided I was going to walk in and try to settle some things that were going on. And I walked into the Senate dining room. There was no dining room anymore, just lounge chairs. There's not a place in the United States Senate where Democrats and Republicans can go and sit down and have lunch together as a group and privately, unless you have it in your office. We don't talk to each other anymore. We don't communicate. We don't talk about the things that matter. And people feel isolated, even in the politics. They don't have the dining room back, do they? Yeah. I remember, and we used to, by the way, we used to travel together. We used to travel, and we'd bring your spouse with you, Democrat, Republican. You get to know somebody else on a personal level. It changes, it doesn't change your political view, it changes your attitude. Well, Americans are being driven apart, and it's not who we are. And where I began, we're the only nation in the world that's come out of every crisis we faced stronger than we went in. And it's up to us as Democrats, but not just to win, but to make sure. I used to teach constitutional law, talk about every generation has an obligation to extend democracy. Well, it's real. Even when I taught it, I thought maybe it's an exaggeration. We all have an obligation to strengthen our democracy. We got that chance now. And New Hampshire is a beacon, not a joke. You're a beacon. You guys do it, it'll send a message that's profound. So please, 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 re-elect your two senators. We need them badly. Elect Maggie, because you'll find she's smarter than you, smarter than me. And elect a governor. Because we can pull did you ever think you'd have, and I know the former vice president pretty well, and his daughter is a congresswoman. And he's a tough guy from Wyoming. We used to argue like hell. But he's completely honorable. And so is she. Did you ever think you would see the congresswoman from Wyoming strongly supporting the Democratic candidate because she knows what the other guy is? So folks, please, 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 we count your votes earlier than everybody else. You know, you've got to. You got hard work to do. Remember, every damn vote counts. Thank you.
President. Mr. President. So, can I sit down for 1 minute? So, Mr. President, we know you love New Hampshire. And we have a New Hampshire sweatshirt. Live free or die.
Guess what? They shut the road like this. I don't know what they vote in New Hampshire. Thank you.